God is great. Amen. We have much to be thankful for. I've been noticing on Facebook that some of you have been posting every day this month, and I assume you plan to continue to do that every day this month, something that you are thankful for. I want to thank you for that reminder each day as I'm reminded of all the wonderful things that exist in my life that I am thankful for. And as Leslie mentioned, we're focusing this month on a series of topics that we are thankful for. Next week, Leslie is going to, if the Lord is willing, bring us a message about our thankfulness for the incredible covenant that God has made with us through Jesus Christ. I look forward to that message. But I was asked this morning if I'd focus our time on our thankfulness for the creation. And we just saw a video a few seconds ago from a guy named Louis Giglio. He's made a pretty incredible ministry out of reminding people of the grandeur, the glory, the awesome wonder of the cosmos. And he, like you and I, when we see out in space and we're marveling at the magnitude of it all and the incredible beauty that exists in space, you and I are reminded of this awesome God that created it all. While many, of course, in the world see that incredible space and think there can be no God. Space is just too big. You and I are dragged before the throne of God when we see things like that, aren't we? We're reminded God made all of that. He imagined it. He created it out of nothing and flings galaxies into space. And what's weird is the further we're able to look out into space, the more we're discovering it's even bigger than we thought. We thought it was big. Now they don't talk in terms of universe, they talk in terms of multiverse. It's not just the one universe that our solar system and galaxies exist in, but beyond our universe are many other universes as big or bigger. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you and I say, wow, God is amazing. And yet, all of that, we've seen further into space than we've seen at the bottom of the oceans here on Earth. We know more about what's above us than we know what's below us. There's some incredible wonder when we think about the creativity of God, isn't there? We marvel. We don't have to go very far here in Tennessee, as a matter of fact, to find some incredible beauty in the creativity of God. This fall, now I've only been in Tennessee for 10 years, and I haven't ever lived in a place where fall colors are more prominent than they are in Tennessee. But this fall has surely been the most magnificent fall I've ever witnessed. I don't know about you, but every single morning driving from Pleasant View to here, and then in the evening driving from here to Pleasant View, I was reminded again that God is an incredible God. I hope you have been too. And yet, all of that, the majesty and glory that surrounds us, is not God's greatest creation. God's greatest creation is not seen in the cosmos. It's seen right here on this little planet. And the wonder of God's creativity. If there's an old story that's told that as God was flinging these cosmos and galaxies out into space, that he spent a little bit of extra time on this seemingly insignificant little planet. And one of the angels tapped him on the shoulder and said, "What's so special about that little planet?" And God whispered, "Well, that will be the visited planet. That's where I will spend some special time." And as he continued to shape and mold that visited planet, he seemed to spend a little bit of extra loving attention on this little insignificant mound of dirt. And again, the angel, confused, looking at all the marvel of creativity, and there's a little extra attention spent on this little, not even a mountain, for goodness sake, it's just a little mound of dirt, and asked God, "What's so special about that little spot?" And God said, "Well, that little mound is going to be known as Golgotha. And that's where I will offer my life for the redemption of all of my creation. And you see, now why I like that story is because I'm reminded that we have a God who not only created us, but He created us with the idea of redeeming us when we fall. That's the kind of a creative God that you and I have. And when we try to understand God's creative genius, we're given a few passages in the Bible. There's some Psalms that are called the creation Psalms. You can get some really good, cool things out of those texts about God's creative genius. Job has some interesting things about the creation of God. But by far, we would get most of our information about the creation from Genesis, the early chapters of Genesis. Let me lay a foundation for our future together, if I may. Something that has transformed my Bible study in recent years, and has not only transformed my Bible study, it's transformed my understanding of my role in the kingdom of God. And that is to try to understand that what we've done in the past is we've taken passages like Genesis 1 and 2, and we've used those as proof texts. We've pulled them out of the story, and then we've gone to attack evolutionists or somebody that might deny that there is a God. And while it's true that we can glean some truths about the creation from Genesis, it's important that we understand that that's not why Genesis was written. God didn't write Genesis to tell me and you how He created the world. There's not enough in Genesis to give us that kind of information. It's too vast. It's too big for that. Genesis was written to tell a group of slaves who had lived in Egypt for 430 years. And as God is dragging them out of slavery and taking them to a place where He will give them things they've never imagined, Genesis is given to them to tell them who God is. And conversely, who they are in relationship to that God. So Genesis then, if you and I started to say, there's things that I'm learning that are transforming my ministry, my life, my understanding of study, it's by beginning to understand that this book is not a bunch of different stories about God's people. It's not a collection of a whole bunch of disparate, wonderful stories about people that have been impacted by God. This is one single story. And so rather than, as we've been conditioned for generations now, it's not something new in our lifetime. This has been going on for hundreds of years. We have taken the Bible with a systematic approach. Systematic theology takes the pieces of the Bible and pulls them out and then begins to break those down and try to glean some practical matters for our lives out of that. Narrative theology, however, tries to understand how all of those verses that we would try to pull out, how they fit into the overall context of the story of God. Narrative theology is important for this generation, especially a postmodern generation, because the postmodern generation is story-based people. And so if we can understand the Bible as a single narrative and how all of it ties together to reveal things about God, we not only will be blessed, but we'll be enabled to bless the next generation of people that really need the story of God. So, I'll throw that out there. We'll be talking about that a whole lot more. As a matter of fact, I've been talking about it for a couple of years in my classes upstairs, and some of you that have been joining me, hopefully we're together trying to figure out what it means to study the Bible from a narrative approach rather than a systematic approach. Now, all that said and done, let's figure out what we're doing today. What we do is we take Genesis and we are told of a God who created life. He didn't just create the cosmos. He didn't just create the earth. He created life on the earth. And why would he do that? See, the better question than what is why would God do that? If we really tried to wrap our minds around eternity, you know, God existed forever before the creation, and God will exist forever after the creation. That's a big number, right? We can't even begin to go there. So if we tried, we might be tempted to think, well, man, you know, the Father and the Son and the Spirit, the triune nature of God existed for eternity before creation. Maybe they got bored. You know, they've been there for a long time. They really don't have a lot to do. You know, they're twiddling their thumbs, and one of them says, hey, let's create something. You know, let's create something and kill a few thousand years, you know. Let's spend a few thousand years with some pets, something that will give us something to do for a while. That's not the picture of our God. And as a matter of fact, you want a better picture of why God created, look at a family. Look at the families around here. There's a great analogy here. It's not a perfect analogy because there's no such thing as a perfect family. There's no such thing as a perfect marriage. But in marriages that are really good, a man and a woman comes together and they fall in love, and man, it just feels like they were always made for one another, and the love overflows. And of course, again, we're talking about imperfect people, so you know that's not always the case in my marriage and in your marriage maybe, but boy, just imagine if you had the perfect marriage and you were made for each other, and the love and the harmony and the joy that you experienced together just overflowed out of your lives. And so much love that you wanted to share it with somebody that was uniquely created out of that love. You see, and that's why children. I've seen some incredible unions in this family bring forth children in that environment of love. Children are born out of love, and I know we live in a broken world. That's not always the case. Many children today are born out of sexual relationships rather than loving relationships. And that harms the children. They'll suffer for that the rest of their lives. Hopefully they won't suffer for that for eternity. But in a loving relationship, when a child is born into that loving union, the loving parents are eager to share the love that they have shared together and alone. They're eager to share that now with this child that has come into their world. See, now that is a really good picture of why God created. Listen, God doesn't need anything. As a matter of fact, Luke tells us in Acts chapter 17, the God who made the world and everything in it is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. God doesn't need me and you. He created us out of deep love, abiding love that overflowed between the Father, Son, and the Spirit in that triune nature. And so if you could picture them then as this loving household, if you will, for lack of a better term, this loving union that overflowed, they wanted to share it with a product of their own creation. And so man was created. But let's take the analogy a little bit further, because you and I know that when we marry and we bring children into the world, man, it starts out with love, right? We can't wait to share our love. Boy, we love this baby, and we can't wait to continue sharing this love. But we know in the back of our mind that kid's going to become a teenager someday, don't we? And that love is really going to be tested a millionfold. Now, you see, God didn't go into this creation process blind, did he? Did God know that when he created his children, that the children were going to become teenagers and that we would rebel? Yes, God knew that. God knows everything. And he certainly knew that. And that's why it's really important that we understand that when God created life, he created life eternal. He didn't intend for us to be thrown into the life, and then he as a kind of a passive father stand back with arms crossed and let us figure out how to live. That's not the kind of God we have. That's not the kind of creator that we serve. The creator that we serve is a loving Father who created life out of that love and began the process of developing a life that would honor him and ultimately honor the children who would serve him. Let's take the analogy one step further. Because not only did this God create life, but this God intended to become a part of that life. And that's where the gospel story comes in, folks. The gospel story includes Genesis 1 and 2 because there's creation, but the gospel story culminates in the creation of Jesus Christ as a redeemer. As God knew he was fashioning the world and he built that little mound that would someday be called Golgotha, God had his mind on Golgotha and a cross experience even before the world was completed. And he knew that this rebellious teenage lot of humanity would be in desperate need of redemption. And just like sometimes we do with our own children, sometimes our children, they rebel to the point that it strains the relationship. And you and I know as parents, and maybe our teenagers don't fully understand this yet. I know I didn't when I was a young man, but as I grew and I had children of my own, I began to realize how very important it is that children who have wandered away from the truth need redemption. They need love. They need a reminder that the home is still theirs even though they've left it. That the love in the family is still theirs even though they left it. And you see, when we witness that in world, sometimes we see parents that are so quick to write their children off and shut them out of their lives. That always startles me. I was a rotten kid. Terrible. Imagine, I was a terrible child. But one thing I've always known is my mom and dad always welcomed me back and showed me loving acceptance. Even not accepting my behavior, but accepting me as their son. And that changed my life. And I've tried to do that with my children. I know you're trying to do that with your children. And you see, that's the kind of God we have. God created life. He created life with a meaning and a purpose, knowing full well that the children would wander away from him. But even as he's creating them, he's creating a plan to bring them home. It sits on a hill outside of Jerusalem called Golgotha. There's a cross standing up there with the Son of God himself hanging there as the world-redeeming act to bring all the children home. Now, one more step in this family analogy, all right? In this family analogy of creativity, what we've got is parents who are madly in love, parents who want to share that love with a product of that loving union, and parents who understand that when they bring that child into the world, they're going to have to suffer with that child, but hopefully provide a point of redemption somewhere in the future. But here's one more thing to think about. And while we're thinking about it with our own children, we got to remember this is what goes behind God's creativity of humanity. When we bring a child into the world, I'm looking at Vicki Gallagher back here, and I know the Gallagher clan right now is overwhelmed with joy and happiness because of the twins, right? Now, they've already experienced some challenges in their family. I don't know what they are. They haven't mentioned any. They wouldn't complain about it. But I know they have because they got kids, and kids are trouble. So there's some struggles that go there. They knew going in that there'd be some struggles, didn't they? But you know what? They have more love for those babies than they do concerns about the struggles that they face. Their love is overflowing. And so those two babies in that household, like babies in your household, are privileged, aren't they? Aren't they privileged? I mean, look at that little red-headed rascal back there. That girl is privileged to be in that family, isn't she? There's something special about growing up in a household. Listen, the world is filled with kids who are not privileged. Underprivileged is a word in our language. Underprivileged children. It simply means that they don't have the privilege of being in a home where they know and experience love on a level that love is intended. But children that grow up in a household where love is the predominant factor, They are privileged children. And even though they may rebel somewhere down the line, at some point in their life, they're going to realize, I was a privileged child. I'm blessed. I am blessed to have been born into and raised by the parents who brought me into life out of their love for one another. We see that here. But when you apply that to our relationship with God, we somehow make a disconnect. We don't always feel privileged, do we? Sometimes, as a matter of fact, we feel pretty hostile about it. But the fact of the matter is, you wouldn't be here today if God didn't decide somewhere in the history of eternity that He desired you in His life. Now that's worth sharing, y'all. There's good news for people like you and me. Your presence here today in the world means that God loved you so much that even before you were born, He started forming you in the womb. And God doesn't create bad, does He? We look at children that are broken, through disease or disabilities or mental illness and stuff, and we think, well, God must not have done a very good job with that. Listen, those kind of brokenness pieces are because of sin in the world, not because of God. And we need to understand that even in that situation, God creates life that is beautiful and incredible. There is no ugly birth in the world. There's no such thing as a bad creation if it comes from God. And so here we are, all of us. Every person in this room is proof that God is love. That's not just a description of His characteristics. It's true about His characteristics, but it's a description of who He is. God is love, John would tell us. And so when God creates, He creates out of that love and plants His love deep inside of each one of us and gives us meaning and purpose and value. We spend all of our lives then going through the wilderness trying to figure out what that means, right? And we veer off course. We're rebellious teenagers. We veer off course, and we keep hearing God echo this call. I'm still here. I still love you. I'm waiting for you to turn around. And as a matter of fact, I died for you, and my son is here with open arms to welcome you back into the household of God. That is good news for a dying world. You and I have reason to celebrate, don't we? We have reason to be thankful, do we? We got a lot of reasons to be thankful. Man, we look at the moon and the stars and all the galaxy and this earth, the incredible beauty that we're surrounded by, all the friends and the relationships that we have. None of it means anything without Jesus Christ. None of it will get us into eternal glory where God designed us for. You see? He's taking us home, but we got to go through the wilderness to get there. You're in the wilderness. Look up, folks. Remember who you are. Remember who God is. You are unique and special in the eyes of God. And that's not fluff. That's truth. God created you because He loves you. And He has a purpose and a plan for you and is asking you to find out what it means. Let's begin that journey, shall we? If you haven't begun that journey today, we hope you'll begin it this day. However we can help, please let us do so. Let's stand together and sing.
Just as I